What is up, my friends, and welcome into another edition of the All Nittany Lion Podcast here on PHLY. Thank you so much for hanging out with us once again, and it was a kick your feet up, rocking chair type performance for the Penn State Nittany Lions against Washington this past weekend in the whiteout. But before we get to that, of course, I want to introduce the guys to my right. That's Adam Telefero and Jason Cabinda. As always, guys, an absolute pleasure to be back with you once again this week. Hope you all had enjoyable weekends. Hope you had an opportunity to just enjoy the second half of Penn State football, because this one was pretty easy for the boys.
It was a good game to watch. It was always good to be back with you guys, man. And I know we were talking a little bit earlier. It was nice to have a game where you can kind of watch it, enjoy it, not stress. And Penn State took care of business.
Yeah, they really did. It was an incredible response from a really tough loss, obviously. Yeah. The type of loss that can really take the air out of you, and the boys really responded well, so it was good to see.
All right, guys, so we got a lot to get into today. We're going to talk about college football playoff odds, talk about the potential of is there a chance for this team to maybe even sneak into the Big Ten title game still? Obviously, a lot would have to happen. We'll preview the Purdue game as well. But as we always do, why don't we start with the win against the Washington Huskies in the whiteout this past weekend at Beaver Stadium. Penn State wins 35-6 over Washington. And guys, my first note that I wrote down was this just felt like it was domination, control from start to finish, because Washington did a decent job on their first possession out of the gate. They drove down the field. They picked up 40-plus yards, and they don't come away with any points because they pushed the 45-yard field goal wide. And then the next four drives for them, they have 14 plays, 39 yards, an average of 2.8 yards per play. And in that same time frame, Penn State has drives of 9 for 72, 14 for 80, 8 for 58, and 9 for 68, all of which resulted in touchdowns. And it was 28-0 in the blink of an eye. Both offensive and defensive units seem to be really, really clicking after that first Washington drive. Just your overall thoughts of how this game got kind of out of hand as quickly as it did in favor of Penn State.
Honestly, to me, it felt like the team really addressed all the points of emphasis coming out of the Ohio State game is really what it looked like to me when I watched that game. We talked about the run defense, how Ohio State was able to run the ball well. I mean, they held Coleman to a very, very below his average of what he's been averaging this year. We ran the ball super efficiently. I know it's a little bit curved by what's-the-name's run at the end of the game. That 70-yarder that Martin was able to break off. But, I mean, regardless, I think they were over 200, rushing. They were great on third down. They were great in the red zone, and they were bad in the red zone against Ohio State. I think we were 5 for 7 in the red zone in this game. So I think overall it's kind of just like all the things we went out of the Ohio State game in terms of like, hey, this needs to be turned around. We need to work on this. This needs to be cleaned up. They cleaned up in this game, and we're able to have a complete game.
Yeah, Jason, I loved everything you said, and it's so true. And I just look about everything that we spoke about on this podcast throughout the entire season, just when you're the better team coming in, exerting your dominance, and not giving Washington, they gave them no hope. It was from the very first snap, Washington knew this wasn't going to be it, that they were going to be in a dogfight. And I just loved how Penn State played. And as Jason said, and Tyler's yourself, coming back off that Ohio, that's a tough emotional loss. And to come back out the way that team did, got to give a lot of credit to Coach Franklin and all the coaching staff and the guys, because, Coach Franklin gets a lot of flack at times, but the thing that about this team is teams that they're supposed to beat, they're going to beat them. And they did that. And it's a great way to kickstart the season after that loss.
So I'm glad you guys brought that up, because in my notes, I kind of wrote down, it just felt like an enforcement of will. It was kind of Penn State basically saying, we're the better team. We know we're the better team, especially kind of getting a little bit of that frustration off of their chest after losing to Ohio State. So one thing I wanted to get into was with Washington specifically, they end up benching Will Rogers, who has had a pretty darn good season this year, in favor of Damon Williams. It looked like it was a little bit of a shakeup, tried to get Williams' athleticism involved a little bit more. He was a little bit more of a dual threat type of quarterback. But even with him on the field, it felt like there was a talent discrepancy yesterday that, quite frankly, I don't feel like I felt since, I don't want to go as extreme as the Kent State game, because that was the most lopsided talent discrepancy that we saw. But this was a Washington team that we gave a lot of praise to because Rodgers was playing well, because Coleman was running the football well.
Yep.
We talked about how they kind of shot themselves in the foot a lot with penalties and mistakes. Jason, you talked about their red zone errors last week or a couple weeks ago when it was the game against USC.
Yeah.
But we gave them their credit where it was due, and it felt like we almost overhyped them a little bit after what we saw on Saturday night.
A little bit. And we talked about the special teams too. And I remember I was on the sideline and they were lining up. I forget what the yardage was of the field goal they missed. Maybe it was from 40 or something like that. And I remember on the sideline, I was like, look, the whiteout effect, I promise you he's going to miss this. Then all of a sudden it goes up, doink, right out the crossbar. And I was like, I told you. And he had missed 6 or 7 going into that game. So I knew it was going to come up, and he missed that one as well. But, I'm glad you brought up the quarterback change. I thought that was the most impressive thing about this game to me. Is when I look at the defense and I saw the way they handled 2 very different quarterbacks. Will Rogers, one, is a good stay-in-the-pocket quarterback. He can run some. They've done some quarterback run stuff. He can get out of the pocket and extend plays. But, the Williams dude who came in, who's going to be the future of their program, he's a dude. That's a true dual-threat guy. He's got some juice. We let him out one time. You saw him scramble for 50 or 60 yards. The dude's got some juice. And for the most part, man, we completely bottled him up and found the answer pretty quickly against him, which was just really blitzing the mess out of him. And I think to be able to make that adjustment mid-game for a guy that you thought maybe you were only going to see 10% or maybe at the most Bo Pribula extent of time during the game, for him to take over the game and then to still play the way that they did defensively, I thought was very impressive.
I think, from my viewpoint, this is probably the most disciplined game I've seen Penn State play this entire season. Yeah. I mean, when you think, when you get up early in the game, sometimes guys will lose focus. You'll see some penalties. You'll see some missed assignments. I didn't see any drop off when the backups came in. No missed assignments. No, we've been talking about penalties all year. No, no bad penalties. We're getting off the field on third downs. So I can't say enough. I mean, this game from top to bottom, and that's what you want to see, as we're going into the end of the season here, hopefully getting into the playoffs, you want to see your team starting to peak. And I think we saw a great step forward from the team all around, offense, defense, and special teams. So I think as Penn State fans, there's a lot of excitement that should come out of this game going into the Purdue game. So
one of the guys in particular, you talk about kind of a complete performance, and sometimes statistically speaking, when you have complete performances, a certain player is just going to maybe get lost in the numbers a little bit if you have a really good run game or your defense just plays super well and one guy gets lost in the conversation a little bit. I felt like Drew Allar was very, very poised on Saturday night, and it felt to me he only I think he ended up throwing for, I don't know, it was less than 200 yards, I'm pretty sure, but it wasn't this crazy amount of yards. But I felt like he was efficient. I felt like he was accurate. I felt like he was poised in the pocket. He did a good job of pulling the football down when he needed to and taking off and running. But to me, Drew Allar was the type of guy who almost kind of transcended the numbers a little bit on Saturday night. I thought he was much better than if you just looked at the box score and said, well, Drew Allar threw for 180 yards and it was mostly the run game. To me, just watching him within the pocket, maneuver the pocket and things like that, I felt like he had a really strong night, even if the numbers don't say that he did.
I think sometimes people forget how special this guy is. I mean, you look at some of those early throws. I think a couple of passes he had to Trey Wallace early in the game. He was fitting that ball into some tight windows. And I just, like I said, his arm talent is – I can't wait to see him, the rest of this year. And when he goes, hopefully he sticks around with us for a couple more years. But when he's going to be a great NFL quarterback, just the way that he is able to fit that ball in there. And you just see the confidence growing. And the thing that I love, and he's done it a lot this season, is that when the play isn't there, he's tucking it and he's gaining 5-6 yards when there's nothing there. So he, again, is just another component of the team that showed that he's continuing to build on his season. So couldn't say enough great things about Drew and the way that he handled himself in that game.
Yeah, I definitely thought this was Drew's most poised game. He looked the cleanest in terms of footwork and going through progressions, delivering the football with anticipation and throwing guys open. I think after that week last week and us talking about receivers, I thought Harrison Wallace really, really stepped up in this game. And I remember writing down in my notebook on the sidelines and being like, hey, man, the Trey Wallace to Drew Allar connection is looking real in this game. Like, that's just what it felt like. I mean, he felt, obviously, outside of Tyler Warren, he felt so confident delivering the football to Trey Wallace. So I hope that connection continues to grow. And they've had games like that this year where the connection between them has looked really good. I'm just looking to see that be a more consistent thing on a game-to-game basis.
A 70% completion percentage this year for Drew Allar so far. He broke the 2,000-yard threshold this past weekend. 13 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, and I think that you could almost look at a guy last year who maybe was a little bit. I thought he was maybe a step worse than his numbers indicated last year at times, and I think this year it almost feels like the inverse is true, where you're going to look at his numbers and they're good. Are they great? Numerically, probably not. But I watch him more times than not, and I see a guy who's probably playing a little bit better than his passing numbers indicate. It's funny how that flip kind of happens.
Yeah, no, but without a question, Drew's definitely taken a step this year. I think really across the board through all phases of his game. I think there's no doubt about that. Regardless of what the numbers say, if you just go out there and watch the film and see him as a player, he's definitely improved and taken a step this year.
Yeah, I thought he was a little gun shy at times last year, where I think at times playing and didn't want to make a mistake. And I think that as he, grew in a year, you develop that confidence. You develop that confidence in your teammates and say, hey, even if I do make a mistake, my defense will come in here and they're going to bail me out. So I just love, to your point, Jason, the confidence that he's playing with. And we got to keep that confidence going throughout the rest of the season. So,
by the way, the Davey O'Brien semifinalists for this year have been announced. Drew Allar is amongst the group of quarterbacks to be among the finalists. I'm not going to name all of them because I think there's about 15 of them still here as the semifinalist group. But amongst them include Jackson Dart from Ole Miss, Dylan Gabriel from Oregon, Will Howard, of course, from Ohio State, Jalen Milroe from Alabama, Diego Pavia at Vanderbilt, Jake Retzliff, BYU, Curtis Rourke from Indiana, Shedeur Sanders from Colorado, Cam Ward from Miami, a couple of other guys, Bryson Daly, the Army quarterback, Blake Horvath, the Navy quarterback. So Drew Allar named one of the semifinalists for the Davey O'Brien Award. I would imagine, guys, he probably will not be amongst the finalist list. I think he'll probably get cut in this round of decision-making. But to get to this point is, you're talking about being amongst the top 15-ish quarterbacks in college football this season.
Yeah, I mean, hey, kudos to him. I think it's well-deserved. He's a guy that has shown that he deserves to be ranked among the best quarterbacks in college football. I think from looking at our offense, he's not asked, I don't think, to do as much as some of these other quarterbacks. I look at Milroe from Alabama, who's got to, he's got to run for at least 75 yards a game for Alabama to be in the game. I mean, he's impressive. And, you look at some of these other quarterbacks, but hey, I know I'm biased, but I take Drew with all those guys to lead my offense. And he's shown that he's capable of being a big game, big play type quarterback, and he deserves all the accolades that he's getting this season.
Yeah, when you look at coaches, especially when you look at the NFL, they want to see you improve every single year, and that's the track that Drew has been on. If you watch his film from freshman year until now, you can see improvements year to year, game to game, and that just shows the type of work ethic he must have, his attention to detail, the film study, all of those things. So, if he keeps on improving at the pace he's improving at, he has a high chance of being a guy that could be drafted within the first 3 rounds when he does make that decision to move on to the next level.
So I'm curious, guys, and kind of off the conversation piece a little bit, but Adam, you brought up a quarterback that maybe isn't tasked with doing everything as perhaps a Jalen Milroe type of quarterback is. When you see a unit that is well-constructed, that is well-rounded, and you're not asking your quarterback to throw the ball 50 times a game, or you're not asking your quarterback to also be your leading rusher in the case of some of the quarterbacks that were named on that list, including Army and Vanderbilt with Diego Pavia, who's been extremely impressive this year. And I don't think he gets enough credit because he's he's at Vanderbilt. But I'm curious your guys' thoughts on how do you grade differently? How do you view and scout that type of a quarterback as opposed to the guy that is kind of weight of the world on the shoulders, and what, like, how do you view that type of quarterback differently than the quarterback that's asked to do everything?
I mean, it's a great question, and from my viewpoint, it's hard to put your finger on it. You look at a Drew Allar. He's a guy that you're not too worried about him running. I mean, you don't have to have a guy spying him for the most part, but he's proved that he has that ability now. So he's giving these defenses a little something else to think about. But I just look at Milroe, like that dude, he hits the corner. You better have some dudes that can roll out there with him because he's taking off. And I just think it adds a different dynamic. And, I'm probably a little unconventional that I like a quarterback that can run, that can get downfield. But I look at the alternative with what we have in Drew. And like I said, I wouldn't take another guy over him. So I probably spoke out of both sides of my mouth on that answer. But it's just fun to watch today's football because you look back in the day, you just had these drop back type quarterbacks and guys like Milroe and others weren't getting the opportunities that they're getting today. So it's just fun as a football fan to see these quarterbacks doing it different ways, but all being successful in their own kind of way.
Yeah, I think you said it there the best. I don't look at it as one guy has, the weight of the offense on his shoulders and one doesn't because he can run or has dual threat ability or whatever the case is. Like, I just think the quarterback position in general, as an offense, you have a ton of weight on your shoulders. And based on your skill set, you have to find your ways to positively impact the game, impact your offense and the team in order to get that job done. But the job is a job regardless of whatever skill set you have as quarterback. If you're selected to be the starting guy, you're put in that position because that's how your team and your coaches feel that puts the offense in the best position to have success. So whether that's, being able to get off your first progression and being fast enough to run it immediately and go get 8 yards for a first down, or having to, have the discipline to go through all your progressions and get down to the check down and let your running back work and get some, after the catch yards and things of that nature. Everybody has a different style. I think it's mostly about knowing yourself, what kind of player that you are, and being super aware of that, and then, playing to your strengths.
Well, guys, we got a lot to get into still, including an outside chance at a Big Ten title appearance. We'll talk more about the 2 undefeated teams in Indiana and Oregon. We're going to talk about the college football playoff because we are quickly approaching the end of the season. And, of course, we will preview the Purdue game this weekend with the Boilermakers. But before we do that, let's handle some business. Let me tell you about some of our friends. And, of course, that includes our friends over at Shady Rays, because with Shady Rays, I don't need to tell you. Let 300,000 other people tell you what it's like to wear a pair of Shady Rays, because they rate them 5 stars for a reason. They're durable, they're pliable, they're built to last, and they have all of the styles, the color schemes, and the different brands that you're looking for in terms of, do you want more of an athletic look? Do you want a leisure look? Do you want an aviator look? You don't have to look any further than Shady Rays, because they've got everything that you're looking for in just about every kind of frame and color scheme and whatever look you're going for. And of course, the optics. Listen, I could sell you on a pair of frames all day, but you're looking for what are the good optics. They're crystal clear. They look amazing on, you're going to look out and you're going to say, man, I have such a depth perception. I have such a color perception. The leaves look beautiful, and the water is amazing, and Beaver Stadium looks great because your Shady Rays optics are so good. And if your shades ever go missing or they take an unexpected hit, don't worry about it, because Shady Rays has the most insane protection in all of eyewear. That's right. Every single one of their pairs is backed by a lost or broken replacement guarantee. And here's the thing. If you're shopping online, sometimes you see something on the website, you like it, you get it, gets to your house. You don't quite like it as much as you thought you were going to. Maybe it doesn't fit your face properly, or whatever the case may be. You can exchange for a new pair or return your pair worry-free within 30 days. There is absolutely no risk to you when you shop. And exclusively for PHLY listeners, Shady Rays is giving out an amazing deal as the holiday season rolls around. Head on over to shadyrays.com and use code PHLY for 35% off your pair of polarized sunglasses. Again, try the pair of shades why 300,000 people have rated them 5 stars. And while you're outside doing some home repairs, maybe you realize you're not quite as good as these home repairs as you thought you were. Don't worry, I fall under that umbrella as well. It is difficult to even do the simplest things around the house sometimes. So if you've got a leaky pipe, or you need air conditioning fixed, maybe your faucets are a problem, or your plumbing, your heating, your cooling, it doesn't matter. The point is, Ace is not only the place with the helpful hardware folks, but they are the place with the helpful hardware home service. They will bring helpful home to you. It's the helpful that you love from the store, now right at your front door. So visit Ace Hardware Home Services online at www.acehardwarehomeservices.com to get started on your next project. You will not go wrong when you trust our friends over at Ace Hardware. Welcome back, I should say, to the All Nittany Lion Podcast here on PHLY. Tyler Zulli, Adam Telefaro, Jason Cabinda. We just recapped a 35-6 win over the Washington Huskies. And guys, I think it's time to turn our attention to some larger things for this Penn State team as they have 3 games left to play in the 2024 regular season. And it's a little convoluted. It's a little bit difficult. It's going to be uphill sledding, and you're going to need a little bit of help for this team. But there is theoretically still an outside chance that Penn State has a path to the Big Ten title game. Now, Indiana and Oregon are both 7-0 within the conference. They're both undefeated on the regular season. Ohio State is also ahead of Penn State. They're 5-1. Their loss comes to Oregon, but they did beat Penn State head-to-head. So it's a little bit murky, guys. But here is the remaining schedule for the other 3 teams. Indiana and Ohio State still have to play each other. Indiana's on bye this week. Ohio State goes to Northwestern. They'll play each other next week. Indiana wraps up with Purdue. Ohio State, of course, finishes the year, as they always do, with Michigan. Now, Oregon has to go on the road to Wisconsin, and they're home against Washington to end the season. Guys, I'm not overly optimistic that this season ends with a Penn State Big Ten title berth appearance, but I guess crazier things have happened. My assumption is it's going to be one of Indiana and Oregon, and then either the other one or Ohio State at this current juncture.
Yeah, I think so too. I don't really think that the Big Ten championship at this point in time is the focus. I think right now Penn State is just control. We can control, get to the playoffs, and let's run the table when we get there. I think that's the mindset this team should have. Yeah, there's a sliver of a chance. To be honest, I still don't understand fully the scenario in which we would end up being the other team besides Oregon that plays in that Big Ten championship. So I think that's the mindset this team has to have moving forward.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, of course, it would be nice to see by some miracle Penn State sneak into the Big Ten championship, but also looking on the other side of the stick, if they don't make it, that's a week off. The rest your bodies, get ready for the playoff, and so I think there's some benefit to not having to play in that game as well. And the way that the selection committee looks, these teams that have off sometimes end up moving up in the rankings just by not playing on the field. So it'll be interesting to watch it all play out. But I think Penn State, as we've said for the last few weeks here, they're in a great spot. You just got to win all these games, which are highly winnable, and go on into the playoffs.
And honestly, it might be a blessing in disguise, depending on how the actual rankings, when that time comes out in terms of their path to a national championship with a team that we probably don't want to face, which is, one of the teams that's going to be playing the Big Ten championship, having that bye week. Like, we'll end up probably playing play our first game and then play like a Big 12 champion or an ACC champion, which in my opinion, I think plays in our favor the best. So down the road, we might look back and think that this might end up being a blessing in disguise for us.
Yeah.
So I'm glad you guys bring that up, because we'll talk way more into detail in just a little bit on the path and the college football playoff and how Penn State could fare. Just to kind of give you an understanding, or I'm still trying to figure it out myself. I guess the easiest way to make it a 3-team race is if Indiana beats Ohio State, because then Ohio State would have 2 conference losses. They would be the odd man out, the earliest odd man out, under the assumption, of course, that Penn State were to win their final 3 games. But if Indiana does beat Ohio State, they effectively will be a lock for the Big Ten championship game, because then at that point, their only loss would come, even if they lost, would come to Purdue, which I think, we'll talk more about Purdue at the end of the show. I think we can all probably agree it's a tall task for Purdue to go beat Indiana on the final week of the season. So you're looking at Indiana probably almost assuredly going to be in if they beat Ohio State. Oregon has to go to Wisconsin, a difficult place to play, but not a place that they would be unaccustomed to playing. And then they're home against Washington. I think that, Ohio State would have to beat Indiana and then lose to Michigan. And then Indiana you have to worry about, you're talking about record against common conference opponents, because head-to-head would go out the window, right? Indiana and Penn State didn't play. Penn State and Oregon didn't play. Indiana and Oregon didn't play. The only two teams that did play each other, the only three teams that played each other, Oregon played Ohio State, and Ohio State will have played Indiana as well. So the head-to-head for Penn State would go out the window. The next would be a record against common conference opponents, And you would have to start diving into who did these four teams play with a commonality, and what's the record amongst those four teams. And then you're talking about common opponent with the best conference record. And then you're talking about common conference opponents based on their order of finish within the conference standings. Yeah, the wording is crazy, guys. I went and go through it. And by the way, that's only tiebreaker 3. There are 7 if need be. And the 7th tiebreaker in the Big Ten is that the representatives will be chosen by a random draw among the tied teams conducted by the commissioner. I don't know if that's ever happened. I don't know if that's ever going to happen. But if that ever does come to fruition, where a random draw is done to determine which of the teams will go to the Big Ten title game, I think there might be upheaval and amongst the fan base of the other team. That would be insane. But the point of the conversation is I think Penn State's probably the odd man out right now. And then it's probably, and then it's whoever loses the Indiana-Ohio State game is the second. I would imagine whoever wins Indiana-Ohio State is probably pretty much bookmarked for the Big Ten title game.
Yep.
So let's dive into, you guys brought up the college football playoff and what it could potentially mean for Penn State. Now, I think a lot of people are under the impression that they're going to finish the year 11-1. I think they're going to be favored, and pretty heavily favored, in all three of their final 3 games. This weekend, they're favored by almost 4 touchdowns. The following week, they go to Minnesota, a difficult place to play, a difficult team right now, but I think they will be a pretty steady favorite. And then they finish the year with Maryland. So, guys, I'm just going to ask you just from the jump, and then we'll dive deeper into it. If Penn State finishes 11-1, there's no way they miss the college football playoff, right?
No way. Especially because of the fact that their only loss will have been to a top 5 team. If that one loss maybe was like at Kent State, or if we lost that Bowling Green game per se, and we ended up 11-1, then maybe I think you talk, oh, well, they got one bad loss. But with the one loss we have, not even being some loss where we lost by 20 points or something like that, we didn't get blown out. And not only did we not get blown out, but we played a top 5 opponent. It's a 1-score game. I just see the committee. I just don't see them leaving us out if we finish out 11-1. I don't see it happening.
Yeah, and to that point, I'm like, well, who would you put in? Like, I would love to see who they would put in over a one-loss Penn State team to a top 5 ranked team. So I think, as we all agree, that it would be mayhem if they tried to leave Penn State out of the playoff. I just don't think that's a possibility.
There's going to be teams with arguments for sure. With 12 teams now, and it being a 4 at-large bids, the same way that when the college football playoffs was the top 4 teams, we were always arguing for 5, 6, 7 to get in as a 4 spot. Like now, there's going to be 5 or 6 teams maybe that have an argument to be one of those 4 spots. So like there's definitely going to be some type of controversy, no matter what the format looks like in terms of a playoffs for the college football.
And I'm glad you bring that up, Jason, because I think that when it was 2. Maybe there was a 3rd team you could argue. Maybe in an amazing college football year, there was a 4th team. But it was realistically like the 2 best teams and maybe a 3rd team on the outside looking in. When there was 4, you're right, it was probably like teams 5, 6, and 7 were considered. Now that there's 12, you're talking about teams like, I don't know, realistically 13 through like 17, 13 through 18, who are going to sit here and go, are we good enough to be the 11th seed? Are we good enough to be the 12th seed? And you're going to be comparing resumes and talking about commonalities of opponents like we just brought up. You're going to be talking about who your good wins are, who your bad losses are. It's going to feel a whole lot more like Selection Sunday for the NCAA men's basketball tournament than it ever has before.
Yeah. I just love it. Just makes this time of the season so much more interesting for teams that, aren't in it. Your fans aren't watching the games anymore. I'm thinking about a team like Colorado. Like if they can find their way into the Big 12 championship, like they can win that thing and be in. Like it's just, I mean, I love watching Penn State football, but I find myself even watching other games now because there's interest. There's that opportunity to slide into the playoffs. I just love for college football where we're at right now. I don't know if they're going to expand it to 16 at any point, but just being at 12 has been. I remember we're back again. I would say I'm old, but back when I was in college, we always like it would be awesome to have a playoff, and to see it actually here now is just awesome.
Yeah, it is cool, and not only that, just to see the parity, amongst college football and the way the landscape has changed, and NIL and transfer portals, like the margin of error is so much smaller, and it always was small, and there's just talent everywhere, and now teams have the access to be able to fill talent gaps in which they just didn't have the avenues to fill them before. So it's pretty neat and cool to see the way college football is shaping out, and just the fact that like every single year on any yearly basis, each team is going to be completely different, whether that's a coaching change and a coach has 20 players follow him to the school that he ends up going to coach at, whether that means, a coach gets fired, new coach gets hired, he brings these guys. Like there's all types of avenues and ways that teams can change their identity and their makeups and really their instant impact and program changing players in which they can get these guys, whether it's through NIL, through money, whether transfer portal, opportunity, whatever it is. So it's pretty cool to see.
It's funny, Adam, you brought up some of the teams that may be kind of lurking in their conference standings and heading to a potential conference championship, because there is a set idea of who may be the bye team, right? I think in the Big Ten, people assume it's Oregon. In the Big 12 right now, it's BYU because they're also undefeated. But if a Colorado were to come to a Big 12 title game and win that Big 12 title game, if SMU goes to the ACC title game and beats Miami, who is the presumed, even with the loss to Georgia Tech, is the presumed ACC frontrunner still right now, or maybe Clemson in the ACC is still lurking. You're talking about these kind of like bracket buster type of teams where the teams that are on the bubble that are waiting for the expected conference champion to be the conference champion. If Oregon loses to Ohio State in the Big Ten championship game, not to say that Ohio State wouldn't have been in already, but it causes an upheaval within the bracket. I think that the Big Ten championship game might actually be the one that has the least upheaval, depending on which of those teams end up winning the Big Ten championship. If I guess unless Indiana wins the Big Ten, and then maybe there's a conversation, does Ohio State miss out because of the fact that would have meant they lost to Indiana? But I think the Big Ten almost has the least scrutiny around it. But, there's these teams across all of these conferences that could really kind of play like party pooper, if you will, for some of these bubble teams. It's going to be intriguing to watch.
Can't wait. But the one thing I've been reading online is people have been hating that Penn State is ranked higher than Indiana right now. And I'll be the person to say I haven't seen a full Indiana game. Maybe I'm just biased and it's Indiana. I'm not used to them being good. But, I mean, what do you guys think about that? I mean, I feel like, again, I'm biased. Penn State is a better team. But Indiana, everyone they put in front of them, they're running up on people.
Yeah, it's tough when you have some schedules or some teams that really only have one test. Like Indiana's one test is going to be Ohio State. Obviously, Michigan had a real down year. I thought, honestly, that they would lose that Michigan game just off the strength of aura and the factor of Indiana not being able to beat a Michigan team. But obviously, I was wrong about that. So as of right now, I have to assume that they are legit. Now, to say that they should be a friend of Penn State, another conversation. But I think it's also important to keep the integrity of teams, programs, organizations that typically have done very well over time. I think that respect is built and earned over time, and I have no issue with a slight bias being given to those facts, to an Ohio State that we've seen in many championship games and at those caliber of games play well and, fare well in those situations over time, than to an Indiana team that may have a one-off year that's an anomaly, that they look really, really good, but okay, do they poop the bed when the actual big game comes? We don't know that, so I'm okay with that type of bias that sometimes gets given out by the committees.
Sounds to me, Jason, like you want to say SEC bias in this conversation.
Honestly, but the thing is, the Big Ten looks like they're the best conference right now. And honestly, you can argue that the Big Ten also isn't a very top-heavy conference, because although in the past it's been the SEC that's dominated college football from that standpoint, and not really by much, but by a bit, you could really make the argument that SEC was very top-heavy with the Alabama, Georgias, LSUs, of the world. And then there was kind of a drop-off when you got to the Auburns, the Mississippi States, the Mizzous, et cetera, et cetera. Like, even after our first four, Oregon, Ohio State, Penn State, Indiana, like, you still have some teams that are pretty decent. You know what I'm saying? Rutgers was having a pretty decent year. They start off this year 4 or 5-0. It's one other team that's obviously having a pretty decent year that I'm forgetting about right now. But, like, we're not as top-heavy as the typical SEC conferences have been. I think we have the argument right now that we have the strongest division.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Jason, one of the teams that you were referring to, I think Minnesota has had a better year than most would have predicted. So with that being said, the conversation, and Adam, it's a great question you pose, because it kind of plays into the next bit of conversation of strength of schedule and opponent. And we've used the phrase common opponent a lot. Let's use the opposite of that, where Penn State's quality wins this year, in terms of, like, quote, the phrase quality. I think I'm a big believer in, I look at the win when you got the win. So, like, if you beat a team in week 3 that was ranked number 5 and they fall off the cliff at the end of the year, maybe due to injury or they're just not playing very good football, you beat the number 5 team in the country when you played them. So to me, Penn State beat the number 19 team in the country when they played Illinois. Now, Illinois has faltered since then. They're unranked. They're 6-4. They're still having a decent year, but they're not the number 19 team in the country that we saw, a handful of weeks ago. Inversely, I think that the same can also be fair if you beat a team that was unranked and then started to rise. Now, if you lose, I think that it's an unfair, hypocritical statement of me, because let's say you lose to an unranked team in week 3, and by week 12, that team is the 15th ranked team in the country. That loss looks better and better as the year goes on. Yeah. I wonder, is it like a grading scale that's unfair to the team that loses, or to the team that wins early versus the team that maybe wins a ranked game later in the season?
I think we all know the way that it should be, but is it the way that it actually gets graded out? Like, you love to think that the teams who, at the end of the day, because in football, like, you grow as a team. Teams get better and better. The best teams are playing the best football at the end of November and going into December. That's where the best teams are shining and have shown the most growth and maturity throughout a year. So you'd love to think that it mostly depends on what teams look like at the end of the year and where they're ranked. And based on that, that's how you judge the wins and losses. But I think there's also hype in the fact that an Illinois came into Beaver Stadium, ranked number 19, trying to improve their program, get themselves past a hump that they've really never been at, or at least not in a long time. Like that, there's still a lot of hype. There's still a lot of build around that game, where I don't think it's fair to necessarily discredit that just because that team falls apart through the rest of the year. So that's a tough question.
Yeah, I look at like a team like Notre Dame. Like, if they were to lose that, what was it, Northern Illinois they lost to?
Yeah, Northern Illinois, yep.
If they were to lose to Northern Illinois like this week, next week, or the last week, would that affect them more? Now they lost to them earlier this season. Is the committee not looking at that as crazy as they would if they lost, in one of these weeks? So I think there's definitely some recency bias when you're looking at wins and losses amongst these teams. But it's going to be so interesting to see how the committee handles all this craziness that's going to transpire over the next few weeks.
So, and I there's a game that I'm thinking about in particular, and Jason, I'm going to ask you, because you were with this team. You guys lose pretty big to Michigan, early in the year. If you guys played Michigan 8 weeks later after the role that you went on, to me, I would have to imagine you guys feel like we're going in, we're beating that team, we're beating any team that's put in front of us after the role that you go on. Even though early in the year you lose. They were 4th ranked at the time. It was unfortunate one-sided game. I would imagine you guys probably go, if we get another crack at Michigan, we're beating them.
Yeah, and I think part of the storyline of that team and even that loss that year was like, I mean, half of our defense was injured. I mean, I was down, B-Bell was down. We had a ton of guys not playing. We had our second, third string linebackers in there. They ran for like 200 yards that game. Like, there were just things that would not have happened in that game had we have been healthy, especially defensively in that game. So I do think that we would have had a lot of confidence that we played them later on in that year. Obviously, I think the end score of that game might have been 42-10. It's not a good look, by any means. But then if you look at the way that team grew and then the Ohio State game and then just winning out the rest of that year and in the fashion in which we won those games, I think it was just hard to say that we weren't the best team in the Big Ten.
So one last thing about this college football playoff conversation, guys, before we turn our attention to Purdue. And I was talking about, good wins and good losses or what's a bad loss. And Adam, you brought up Northern Illinois, Notre Dame losing to Northern Illinois. They also have wins against Texas A&M and Navy. So what's the balance between, your good wins and your bad losses, and how does that play? So all of that to say, I want to ask you guys, if you had to have a crystal ball right now, do all four of the top four ranked Big Ten teams, Oregon, Penn State, Indiana, Ohio State, do all four of those teams make the college football playoff?
I think they get in just off the strength of the fact that the Big Ten looks like it's the best conference right now.
Yeah, I agree. I think if anyone gets clipped or left out, it's going to be Indiana just because of who they are. I think Oregon, Penn State, Ohio State will be all right. But I would love to see all four get in.
Yeah, because if we thought that the SEC was the best conference right now, and you listed four of the best SEC teams, it's like LSU, Alabama, Georgia, I don't know, throw somebody else in there, Tennessee. And those were the four best SEC teams. And we also felt as a whole that the SEC was performing the best as a conference. I don't think we'd be arguing for a second that four SEC teams got in.
Yeah, I think the thing with the SEC specifically is, we're getting to a point now where they're beating each other.
Yeah.
So does that help? Do you say, hey, we lost to a really good Tennessee team, but we beat a really good Ole Miss team? Or does it say we're just beating up on each other, and at some point there's just going to be a process of elimination,
right,
because you're just beating each other, in the regular season?
Yeah, that's tough. That's true.
All right, guys. Well, we'll check back in on this conversation in a couple of weeks as we get a little bit more clarity as we head closer and closer to the end of the college football season. But before we do that, let me tell you about some of our friends here at PHLY. And of course, I've been telling you about Empire Today for a long time. You know the jingle, you know the slogan, but do you know what Empire stands for? Empire stands for great quality customer service. There are a million different flooring companies throughout the world and throughout the United States, but what Empire provides you is a shop at home feel, or a shop in the store feel, from the convenience of your home. They are going to walk you through every step of the process. They're not going to make you feel overwhelmed by the floor buying process. It can be a lot. I don't know if you want carpet. You don't know if you want hardwood. You don't know if you want tile. You don't know what you're looking for in your kitchen, your bathroom, your living room. You don't know what you want your space to look like. And that's why the virtual floor designer with Empire is one of the great tools of online shopping. So all you got to do is take a picture, upload it to the virtual floor designer, and you will see exactly how your floors are going to look in your room. And you can click through different options, and you can say, what does it look like with hardwood? What does it look like with tile? What does it look like with something maybe I never thought about before? Empire has you covered, because shopping at the big box stores in person can be difficult. There's a lot of questions. You have a lot of concerns. You want to know exactly what it's going to look like. So you're taking swatches home and you're taking different brands home and things like that. Empire keeps it simple. They help you through every single step of the process. So schedule a free in-home estimate today, and all listeners can receive $350 off when they use the promo code PHLY. Restrictions do apply. See empiretoday.com/PHLY for more details. And speaking of PHLY, it's never been a better time to become a PHLY diehard. I've been telling you about the PHLY diehards program for a long time. Unfortunately, our offer just ended. We had a sweet offer to get in on a discounted price, but don't worry about it. I understand maybe the extra price is a little bit difficult, but diehards right now can become a PHLY diehard for just $4 a month billed annually. $48 a year gets you a free t-shirt and access to our exclusive written content. You'll get plenty of discounts on live events. And of course, you're going to get access to the PHLY Discord Lounge, where we all hang out and we talk about sports and music and movies and things like that. Now, I will say this. If you're looking for some of the best premium content in the city, you're not going to find it anywhere else with the exception of PHLY. You can get great written content from our entire Eagles crew. Fran Duffy does amazing breakdowns on YouTube each and every week that are diehard exclusives. And of course, Zach Berman is at each and every Eagles game. We have Charlie O'Connor with the Flyers, Kyle Neubeck and Derek Bodner with the Sixers, an amazing staff that is dropping you premium written content each and every week. And as I said, 20% off all paid events. So if you're looking about a $20 entry fee, well, guess what? You just saved yourself $4. That $4 might go to a beverage or your first appetizer, whatever the case may be. Come and hang out with us at PHLY. It has never been a better time to become a diehard than today. Welcome back to the All Nittany Lion Podcast here on PHLY as we wrap things up. Guys, Penn State turns their attention to Purdue this weekend. And I just wanted to rattle off a couple of stats for you really quickly, and I'll let you guys expound on them because this feels like an unfortunate matchup for the Purdue Boilermakers. 1-8 this season. They have not beaten an FBS opponent all year. They've been shut out twice in their last 3 weeks. They've given up 35 or more points 6 times this season. They rank 127th in points per game. Only Middle Tennessee State, Air Force, Southern Miss, Houston, Kent State, and Florida State score less. And that's with a caveat that they scored 49 points twice this year, once in the win against Indiana State and once in a 50-49 loss. They've scored 162 points this season. That means 98 of them came in those 2 games. You extrapolate those 2 games, they are averaging 9.1 points per game in the other 7. I could go on and on and on about the unfortunate nature of this Purdue season. I know James Franklin brought up, he always talks about the players to watch. He mentioned the quarterback Hudson Card. This is not a very good Purdue team, and I don't have any way to sugarcoat it, and I don't mean to be unabashedly aggressive about it, but this is just not a very good Purdue team this year.
Yeah, it's not. I think in a sense, and I talked about this with Christian on the postgame show, I think it's very important for Penn State not only to position themselves in the college football playoff conversation in the standpoint of winning out these games, but winning these games out in a fashion that shows that you absolutely belong. I have no doubt in my mind that Penn State's going to go out there and beat this Purdue team, but I think it needs to be the type of game that they go out and we have our freaking reserves in by 3-4 minutes into the third quarter. I think that's the type of fashion that this game needs to be won in order to continue that conversation of, yes, without a doubt, Penn State is a contender, and there's just no way we can leave this team out of the 12-team playoff. Yep,
I think you got to get some style points. Come out here, put them away early. Just similar to what they did last week against Washington. Like you, Tyler, I was just looking at some of these scores. 35-0 against Oregon, 45-0 against Ohio State, 66-7 against Notre Dame. When they play quality opponents, it usually doesn't turn out too well for them. So to Jason's point, if you come in, play how you play, show this committee that, hey, these teams like Purdue aren't even in the same stratosphere as a Penn State football team.
We'd be naive to think that, at the end of the year that there aren't going to be some decisions that come down to not just if you won games, but how you won. As we continue to expand the college football playoff, now the amount of criteria that goes into it become bigger and bigger, and the things that we look at and use as decisive factors into why we allow a team in as opposed to not. I think these type of things are going to be factored into those decisions.
I agree.
Yeah, I think as you guys talk about, like, leave no doubt, type of performances where, so some of the teams, Jason, you brought up some of the SEC teams that may be direct competition for Penn State for seeding. And then maybe if there does become a conversation of like, does a team get in? Does a team not get in? Some of those teams, I think, include Ole Miss. I think include Alabama. Then you're talking about teams with, multiple losses in the, more than 2 losses in the SEC, even though I know like South Carolina's ranked, LSU's ranked, Missouri's ranked. I think LSU is probably pretty much out of that conversation. I think South Carolina is probably out of that conversation. But I look at Ole Miss specifically, and they have a non-conference win against Middle Tennessee State, 52-3. They beat Wake Forest 40-6. They beat Georgia Southern 52-13. They beat a now ranked South Carolina team by 24. They handle Arkansas. They win by 32. And then they go and beat Georgia this past weekend, 28-10, at home. This past weekend, 28-10 at home. They have some pretty statement victories, does Ole Miss. So you have to kind of counter that. And I'm not talking about the win against Georgia, but I'm talking about you can't allow a Bowling Green to hang around, much like you can't allow a Purdue to hang around. This has to be a pretty significant statement win for Penn State.
Yep.
Guys, I hate to harp on this, but I got to give you some numbers for this Purdue team. Third down conversion percentage, 33%, tied for 118th in college football. Time of possession, 26 minutes, 123rd in college football. They allow 246 passing yards per game, 108th. 200, just under, it's 199.6 rushing yards. That's 118th. Their -7 turnover margin is 115th. Their red zone defense is 119th. Their red zone scoring is 118th, and they've only scored touchdowns on 15 of their 28 red zone possessions this season. Again, don't mean to harp on it, but it is part of the conversation of this matchup with Purdue. I think that to put it into perspective, there are, I believe, 133 FBS teams this season. And you're talking about a team where I just rattled off like 10 stat lines, and they're within the bottom 15 to 25 in just about every statistical category this season.
Yeah, I mean, this is clear that Penn State is the far superior team, but this is where we talk about discipline. When we're getting these guys 3 and out, no penalties to keep these drives going, all those things. I think if Penn State just plays how they know how to play, this game should be over by mid-second quarter.
I agree totally. I'm trying to find words to describe whether it's matchups, whether it's, players we got to watch out for and things of that nature. I just can't BS you here. This is just one of those games where, on paper, we're just the better team. We just got to go out there and show it.
Yeah.
So, guys, as we wrap things up, I know we were talking about the college football playoff earlier, and I'm curious your guys' thoughts on this. Just a fun question, because we were talking about maybe teams that upset the balance of power a little bit. If you had to pick a team, and I know I'm putting you on the spot a little bit, so I apologize. If you had to pick a team that wasn't, the conference winners or the next, 4 or 5 teams in the college football landscape, if you had to pick a team that might be like a havoc wrecker come playoff time, that like if they get in, could not only win a game, but maybe win a couple games and upset kind of the shift and have a little bit of a shift in power in this college football playoff bracket.
I mean, for me, I know it's the kind of like the cliche popular pick, but I keep going back to Colorado. Like, I watched them, man. Like, everyone knows about Shador and Hunter, but they got some guys, man. Some of those other wide receivers, they got dudes that make plays. They got some athletes, and if they get rolling, I mean, they start believing, they could be a problem for some people. I hadn't really watched whoever they played this Texas Tech.
Yep, Texas
Tech. They got dudes on the outside that are just making plays. I'm like, man, this is not just Shador and Travis. This is a squad that has some athletes that can play with anybody in the country, I think.
Yeah, for me, it would be Indiana. I think they do lose to Ohio State, and when they do, they'll have the same argument for us as we do in terms of getting in. I do think, like I said, because of our conference, that both of us get in. But, if that's a close game against Ohio State and like us, they go out there and, only lose by 1 score, I think that'll very much so justify how good this team is if that's a 1-score loss to Ohio State. And at that point in time, it's like, okay, this team really might be for real. Now, they got a late start from a standpoint of where they started in the rankings. They weren't as fortunate as us to be higher, even though they're undefeated. So that kind of hurts their argument, or might make things more difficult for them later on when those decisions happen, or if they lose to Ohio State. But, man, if they get in and it's a 1-score loss to Ohio State, I don't see how, they aren't a team that gives you some trouble if you see them in the playoffs.
Adam, you bring up Colorado. Their final 3 games of the season are a 4-5 Utah team that is 1-5 in Big 12 play, a 3-6 Kansas team, which is 2-4 in Big 12 play, and then maybe one of the more disappointing teams of college football this year. They wrap up the year with 3-7 and 0-7 in Big 12 play, Oklahoma State. Colorado, theoretically for a Big 12 championship game, kind of controls its own destiny. I know BYU is the undefeated team, and the likelihood is they're going to be one of the representatives in the Big 12 championship game. But at this point, there are several teams with 2 losses, but Colorado is the only one with 1, and now they're 7-2 on the regular season. Their only loss in Big 12 play was against Kansas State, who was in pretty good position themselves to maybe be one of the representatives before losing to Houston this past weekend, kind of inexplicably losing to Houston. Colorado has a lot of destiny under their own control for a Big 12 title opportunity.
Yeah, and it looks like they're starting to believe. I mean, everyone knows about their talent, but it's all those those guys that we don't know about that are stepping their game up, and they're fun to watch. I mean, just from Coach Prime to everything they got going on within that program, it will be fun to watch them sneak into the playoffs and see what they do.
Yeah, I mean, when you have a quarterback that's widely regarded as the either number 1 or number 2 quarterback that's going to go out in the draft, man, I think in college football you got a chance with that. So
yeah.
So one final team, and I know we're getting out of here, that I think could be an upheaval creator. Now, one of 2 things is going to happen. Either they're not going to get in to the college football playoff, they'll find a way to lose in the conference championship, or I think they could be a team that may be poised for some intrigue. I think we all can agree the ACC is probably the weirdest and maybe the weakest of the big power conferences left. SMU has scored almost 400 points this year. They're outscoring opponents 390. I think it was 391 to, let me try to find the exact number. 361 to 196. They're 5-0 within the Atlantic Coastal Conference. They're the 14th ranked team in the country. Their only loss was an 18-15 loss to BYU, which, again, we were talking about, losses looking better and better as the year goes on. BYU continues to roll. They're still undefeated. Looks like a much better loss. I know that the ACC might be a little bit down, but they've beaten a ranked Louisville team. They beat a ranked Pitt team, and they're pretty much dominating the teams they're supposed to. They dropped 66 on TCU. They put a 42 spot on Florida State, a 40 spot on Stanford. Their closest game was against Manny Diaz's Duke team, who held them to 28 points. That's a team that, could they lose to Miami in the ACC title game? 1,000,000%. If they beat Miami in the ACC title game, I could see them causing some trouble, even though we've talked about how the ACC may be one of the weaker conferences this season.
Yeah, I haven't seen SMU. I'll be the first to admit I haven't seen them play this week or this year. But watching College Game Day, I know Kirk Herbstreit every week is talking about SMU. So I know that's a guy that watches a ton of college football, and just hearing him speak so highly of those guys, like I said, I gotta check those guys out. But it sounds like they got it going down there, and again, just another team with the beauty of this 12-team playoff that'll give us something to think about when we get towards the playoffs.
Yeah, definitely a storied program with a lot of history, man. So
yeah.
I think they got a lot of pride. I think they're trying to bring back their culture and tradition and bring themselves back to relevancy in college football. So I feel like that's a team that's just playing for their pride and playing for the guys that are to the left and to the right of them, and really trying to accomplish something that school and organization hasn't in some time.
Yeah.
Well, guys, this was an absolute blast as always. I look forward to our chats every single week, our 4 o'clock conversations with 2 of my favorite Penn Staters in the game. So a big shout out to all of our diehards, a big shout out to everybody watching us on TV, because, guys, we're on Samsung and Roku now. So we are expanding as we keep going. So nothing but good things happening here at PHLY and for the All Nittany Lion podcast. And it would not be possible without everybody hanging out and watching with us. And, of course, with the guys to my right, who, again, are 2 of my favorite people to talk Penn State football with each and every week, Adam Telefero and Jason Kabinda. So, guys, I look forward to chatting with you all next week. We'll be back here again at 4 o'clock as we break down the Purdue tape and we start to look ahead to Minnesota. We are just 3 games left in the Penn State regular season before we talk about conference championships. We talk about Heisman winners. And, of course, we talk about the college football playoff. So for everybody that tuned in to the All Nittany Lion podcast, thank you so much for hanging out with us. We will check back in with you guys next week at 4 o'clock right here on PHLY. Hope to talk to you then.
We all silly like the mayor.